Oliver Smith was born and raised in a small town in rural Utah. He inherited from his father an old, almost destroyed car, which led his brothers to ridicule him. But then something unbelievable happened. Oliver's father, Theodore Smith, was a farmer who took great pride in the fact that he had become wealthy through his own hard work, without any help from others, and without inheriting anything from his family. Many years ago, Theodore bought a piece of barren land in the southern part of the state with what little money he had left. He fenced it off and vowed to make those acres fruitful, while his neighbors thought the man was going crazy and throwing his money away. At that time, Theodore already had 3 sons, with Oliver being the youngest. In 5 years, Theodore's lands not only became productive again, but also transformed into a thriving farm, providing jobs for hundreds of local residents. Thus, from a poor and unknown family, the Smiths managed to achieve a level of importance in the region that they had never dreamed of reaching. Over time, Theodore's farm became one of the main suppliers of products not only for Utah, but for other parts of the country as well. For many, the most impressive part of this whole process was seeing how the accumulated wealth didn't change Theodore Smith's character or way of being. He remained a friendly man with a heart full of hope. More than anything in the world, Theodore loved his 3 sons, Cal, Tony, and Oliver. The farmer tried to give the same upbringing and treatment to all his children, but it so happened that he identified more with the youngest. Of course, Cal and Tony noticed how Oliver was more favored by their father, and joined forces to make the youngest's life miserable, calling him a weakling and a daddy's boy. The jealousy between the brothers had a reason to exist. After all, Oliver was the son who spent the most time with their father. Taking advantage of this closeness, Theodore would tell stories of his youth, how he started making the farm successful, and all the trials he had to overcome to manage the lands where they lived, and that provided for the family and all the employees. One of Oliver's favorite pastimes was driving around the property in a car or truck. As a child, he would sit on his father's lap and pretend to steer the vehicle. During his teenage years, it was during these drives along dirt roads that he had the best conversations with his father. And perhaps it was these long conversations between father and son that inspired the youngest to want to understand his father's business better, because, among all the children, Oliver was the only one interested in going to college. Cal and Tony loved the farm, but they were used to receiving the family business money and spending it on frivolous things for themselves. The 2 older brothers never worried about having solid preparation for the day they would have to take over their father's business. They thought that if their father had started everything from scratch, without any education and without any mentor, they too would be able to keep the farm running. Theodore didn't want to impose on his children what they should or shouldn't do, but he knew that things no longer worked like they did in his time. Theodore Smith had always been in robust health, but as the years passed, he felt weaker and more tired. One day, he became gravely ill for nearly a month. He had to accept the fact that he was now an elderly farmer and should be concerned about the future. So he decided to call in Louis Rawlings, his lawyer, to prepare a will. Theodore's goal was to ensure a dignified and comfortable life for his children, without the problems he had to face when he was young and poor. Thus, they decided that Cal, the eldest son, would inherit the farm, with thousands of heads of cattle, poultry farms, and some acres of land for future cultivation. Tony, the middle son, would inherit hundreds of hectares of already cultivated fields, farm equipment, the parents' house, and a small gas station at the town's entrance. All of this was carefully documented, following the wishes of the family patriarch. However, Louis Rawlings realized that almost everything the Smiths had of value had already been fairly and evenly divided between the 2 older sons, but he felt uneasy when he noticed that Oliver, the youngest, was not going to receive anything. The lawyer then deduced that Mr. Smith had other assets beyond his knowledge, perhaps an apartment abroad or shares in companies, and that these assets would be left to Oliver, but he was wrong. In fact, the father was leaving only one of his possessions to his favored son, a very old car that Theodore had bought on the side of the road the day he met their mother. Oliver had always liked the farm's vehicles, had a good sense of mechanics, and loved driving, feeling the engine pulse in his heart. The car, with great sentimental value, was broken down, sitting in a barn on the farm, but the father was sure that the youngest would be able to fix it and make it run like in the old days. Already anticipating a family dispute he would have to mediate, Louis wanted to know if that was really what the farmer wanted. to leave the wealth to Cal and Tony and only a broken-down old car to Oliver. In response, the farmer laughed and said, "Yes, this is my final and irrevocable decision." The lawyer expected Theodore Smith to laugh off the situation and announce that it was all just a joke. But the farmer and his wife really signed the official document with that division, so it was all true. Despite being an absolutely unusual situation, Louis knew he had no right to judge his client's actions, so he filed the paperwork and said goodbye. Lewis Rawlings was an experienced lawyer and had seen many strange decisions in his life, but he couldn't understand how a kind and wealthy man like Theodore Smith could make such an unfair distribution of assets among his children. He knew that Oliver would be resentful and confused when he read that will, and this would spark a family fight that could have been avoided. What was Theodore trying to achieve with that? Anyway, that day Louis returned to his office in town, thinking that one day he would have to face the wrath of the young man and the greed of his brothers, but he wouldn't have the power to change anything. 5 years later, the Smith family had experienced 2 losses. The first was the death of the mother. A year later, it was Theodore's turn to leave this world. He was already weakened by old age, but losing his wife was a severe blow that hastened the decline of his health and his enthusiasm for life. At least Theodore managed to say goodbye to his sons, although Cal and Tony had been waiting for months for the inevitable to happen. They knew it would be difficult for their father to recover, and at the same time, they couldn't wait to get their hands on the family fortune. Oliver, on the other hand, believed that his father could still recover and live for a few more years. But that didn't happen, and he was visibly shaken. After all, he was the closest son to his father. Furthermore, to care for his sick father in his final months, the young man took a leave of absence from college with only 1 semester left to graduate. A week after the patriarch's burial, Cal, Tony, and Oliver met with Louis Rawlings, the family lawyer. It was a highly anticipated meeting for all of them, but especially for the 2 older brothers. Oliver still felt a bit lost without his father around in that large farmhouse. Louis then read the will with the wishes of the father and mother from a document that had indeed been signed by both, without a shadow of a doubt. The lawyer read calmly, noticing how Cal and Tony grew excited about the wealth and assets left to them. But when it came time to discuss Oliver, it was noticeable how the young man felt uncomfortable and out of place. Was this some kind of joke? Even Cal and Tony couldn't believe what they were hearing the family lawyer read. Oliver was deeply hurt by it, especially after seeing his brother's joy. They never cared about the farm, only about the profits extracted from it, and they had gotten everything. And he, who loved the land and was interested in the business, had been left with an old abandoned car. "Oh, Oliver, don't be sad. Now you can go back to college with a different car. But you'll have to return with a tow truck," Cal said, mocking the young man in front of the lawyer. Oliver didn't respond to the provocation, just bowed his head, confused and thoughtful, while his brothers planned a big party to celebrate receiving those hefty inheritances. They surrounded Oliver and mocked him without mercy. Louis felt sorry for the youngest, but relieved that he didn't have to separate a fight between brothers he had seen grow up. After the meeting, Oliver went to the barn where the broken-down car his father had bought on the roadside was stored. He pulled the tarp off it, and a thick cloud of dust filled the air. Now that vehicle was his share of the inheritance. He tried to start the engine, but nothing happened. At that moment, Tony appeared in the barn and reminded his brother that he was now the heir to the house, and as such, he should hurry up and move somewhere else and take that old piece of junk with him. Oliver had no choice. He didn't want to spend another day in humiliation, so he packed his clothes and most important items. He called a taxi to take him to a simple hotel in the nearest town and a tow truck to haul his parents' old car. As he was leaving the farm, he noticed the family lawyer's car coming in the opposite direction. The car stopped, and he also asked the taxi driver to pull over. The man came towards him. "Did they kick you off the farm? I feared that would happen," Louis said. "Oliver, I'm sorry about this. Those were your father's last wishes. I couldn't interfere. But know that it's not just that old car your father left you." Oliver was having a terrible day, and already expected it to be some other useless thing he would have to inherit. "What did my father leave me now, the Titanic?" he asked sarcastically. "No, this sum of $50,000 for you to fix the car," said the lawyer, handing him an envelope. Oliver looked at the envelope and placed it on the car seat. He thanked Louis and nodded for the driver to continue. It wasn't until he reached the hotel room that he opened the envelope and was surprised by what he found. In addition to the $50,000, there was a paper with handwritten instructions. It was his father's handwriting, and he recognized it immediately. This revelation gave him a glimmer of hope, and he eagerly began to read the paper. It was a letter from Theodore, saying that Oliver should repair that car with the money he had received. Then, he should go to a car fair in Dallas, where he could sell the car. And if the price offered wasn't to Oliver's liking, then he should go to a fair in Houston. The son didn't know what to make of all this. What were these car fairs? Had old Theodore Smith, besides being physically weak, lost his mind and no one noticed? What buyer would be crazy enough to bid on a car like that? At the end of another long day of reflection, lying in bed, Oliver remembered the afternoons on the farm when he would drive around with Theodore. His father wasn't academically educated, but his life experience gave him advice filled with wisdom, and young Oliver always listened attentively. And it was when he closed his eyes to sleep that Oliver decided to take that shot in the dark and fulfill his father's last wishes. He spent the following weeks entirely focused on the old car, disassembling and reassembling its engine, replacing its parts, cleaning its upholstery, and giving its heavy rustic body a thorough overhaul. From time to time, Cal and Tony would visit their brother and tell him he should give up. With the $50,000 he had received from the lawyer, he could have a newer car and save himself all that hard work. But if Daddy's boy wants to waste money and stick with that junk, fine, Cal said. Good thing Dad knew who to leave that pile of rust to, Tony commented. Oliver had doubts about his decision, but he had gone too far to turn back now. He would only stop when that car was perfect, even if all his shirts ended up stained with grease and oil. Almost a month later, he sat behind the wheel and started the engine. The car groaned, spat out a lot of black smoke from the exhaust, but it started. Oliver was happy to have managed to revive that old wreck. He wasn't useless after all. The engine's roar reminded him of his father. Now he would have to drive to the car fair in Dallas to try to sell the car, as his father had requested. Oliver made it to Dallas driving his old wreck without any issues. He found the car fair his father had mentioned and discovered that it was an event dedicated to vintage and rare cars. He saw many well-preserved cars, others modified, and some that looked downright crazy. But unfortunately, none of the potential buyers wanted to offer more than $10,000 for Oliver's car. He wasn't going to sell for 5 times less than he had spent just to restore his father's vehicle. So he decided to drive a little further and head to Phoenix. Every time the young man hit the road, it was a cause for concern. Despite being a good mechanic and having replaced many parts, the car was a model manufactured before Oliver was born, and his fear of breaking down in the middle of a deserted road was palpable. Luckily, the refurbished engine held strong, and Oliver made it to the Phoenix Fair without any major scares. As soon as he entered the venue, he noticed that his car caught the attention of some people. At this event, Oliver met several wealthy collectors who were simply drooling over his car. They called the vehicle a true American thoroughbred and a gem for those who know the history of this country. But what really impressed the young man was the auction for his car. It started at $100,000 and slowly climbed higher, reaching $500,000 and surpassing the $1 million mark. When it hit $3 million, Oliver couldn't believe he had been driving a gold mine all this time. Finally, a collector purchased his father's car for $5 million. That was more money than he had ever dreamed of having. It was enough to buy Cal and Tony's entire inheritance twice over. He didn't know why his father had never mentioned that the vehicle was a rarity, but he now understood why he hadn't received anything from the farm. His father had left his most valuable and secret asset to him because only Oliver would have been able to revive that machine. In other words, he was the only one who would put in the work without knowing that the car was worth so much. With the millions he earned from the auction, Oliver bought a house, finished the last semester of college, and started his own business. In no time, he got married and had a daughter named Selena. Cal and Tony never discovered how the youngest brother had come into so much money so quickly and never managed to keep the accounts of the businesses they had inherited from the family under control. Month after month, they had smaller and smaller profit margins. The expenses and poor management of the farm began to drain their investment reserves, and gradually the brothers found themselves in serious trouble. They had to lay off employees and sell part of the land to cover loans they had taken from the bank. In 3 years, The Smith family business was hanging by a thread. Cal and Tony were on the verge of throwing in the towel and losing everything their father had built from scratch. Almost miraculously, the family lawyer, Lewis Rawlings, showed up at the farm's door with an offer to buy all the Smiths' land and businesses. If they accepted the amount offered, the money would be in their account the next day. The amount wasn't as high as the two brothers would have liked, but they were desperate. They wanted to return to a peaceful life, with some money in the bank and no worries. So, they accepted. As they were leaving the farm, they ran into their younger brother, Oliver. Cal and Tony warned him that he should take one last look around the property because they had just sold everything to someone else. "This headache is no longer ours," Cal said. "I know," the younger brother replied. "I'm the buyer. You can check the name on the transfer. Luckily, our father isn't here to see your failure with our family's legacy. You're my brothers, and I love you, so I hope you use the money you received for the property wisely." From that day on, the Smiths' farm became the home of Oliver, his wife, and Selena. To this day, you can find Oliver driving along the dirt roads, always accompanied by his little daughter, whom he raises with the same dedication his father raised him with. If you enjoyed the story, please leave a like, and this other video appearing on the screen now will probably touch you as well. Enjoy, and see you in the next video.